All right. So for today, a block will be helpful, not necessary. If you are feeling really uh, like you really want to fire up your core, you could use a hand weight, like a light hand weight instead. We'll be using the block if we're not using hand weight. So that is an option. We are going to be doing a lot of planking, but know that with planking, you always have the option to lower down onto your knees. So just keep that as an option. And as usual, we'll kind of progress towards it. And oftentimes my reasoning for progression is to offer you along the way options to go back to, right? So if there's something you're like, I'm just not feeling this, you can always opt to do something that we've already done. So with that, I do want to show you a couple of things just because I think that they'll be helpful. Class is kind of focused on the deep intrinsic core muscles. Diaphragm is something we've been working on a lot together. And it's that feeling of if you bring your hands around your rib cage. So it's that feeling of when you inhale, the full circumference of the ribs expand. And when you exhale, the ribs kind of move out of the hands. So just you can close your eyes and just take a few breaths with this awareness of feeling where your hands and your ribs meet. When you inhale, even if the thumbs are where the thumbs are on the back of your body, you can feel the rib cage expand there. And you may notice that one side expands a little bit easier than the other side. And also feeling as you exhale, the rib cage move away from it. So the diaphragm moves downward instead of forward. And that's that full circumference expansion and full circumference kind of moving inward. So the diaphragm is the top of your core. You can open your eyes again. If you were to bring your hands like from the sides of your rib cage down, that is the way that the fibers of your external oblique go. So we're kind of going from superficial, so the layer closest to the skin is that external oblique, and it comes like this. The internal oblique goes the opposite way. So if you're to bring your hands down from the rib cage and then take them around towards your back pocket, they go this way. And then the transverse abdominis kind of comes from if you were to bring your hands and that little space between the bottom of your rib cage and the top of your hips and around towards the midline. It's your corseting muscle. That is your transverse abdominis. So these muscles, not so much the external oblique, but the diaphragm, the internal oblique, the transverse abdominis, and then the pelvic floor, and then the muscles along the spine, they establish your deep intrinsic core. They establish your stability. And this is what we're going to focus on today. So come down onto your back. Have your block close by. So somewhere where you can grab it. And start with your knees bent, feet wide, and allow your knees to knock in towards each other. Bring your heels of your hands and rest them on your hip points. And bring your fingertips and rest it on your pubic bone. And just gently rock back and forth, kind of exaggerating either a posterior tilt, so pushing your low back towards the floor, feeling your pubic bone lift higher than your hip points, And then the opposite of that, pushing the tailbone towards the floor, and your low back comes off the floor, feeling the hip points lift higher than the pubic bone. And just rock back and forth between these two extremes. And you can let your knees come slightly apart. And each time you rock, lessen your rock each time, forward and back, until you come into the point where your hip point and your pubic point rest at the same height. So this is putting the pelvis in more of a neutral. You'll feel that your lower back is off the floor, slightly off the floor. So just taking one last kind of awareness to notice hip points, pubic bone in that same alignment. Keep your hands there and start to shift the back of your rib cage towards the floor without losing that pelvic tilt. And bring your heels of your hands to the bottom of your rib cage on the sides and move back into that breath that we started with. So as you inhale, feel the diaphragm move down towards the belly, straight down. As your rib cage, the circumference of your rib cage expands all the way around. You might feel some awareness of the rib cage in the back closest to the floor expanding down towards the floor as well. And notice the tendency of perhaps maybe a natural tendency of the ribs flaring, and try to kind of use your hands resting on the fronts of your ribs as a reminder to keep it down. Chin is tucked, collarbones broad. Maintaining the awareness of all the cues. Now let your knees drop in towards each other. Keep one hand on the bottom of your rib cage and bring one hand back to your chest. So maintaining just a semblance of slight tone to maintain the natural curves of your spine, but soften your breath. Coming into a space of your natural breath, neither big neither too small, just kind of finding the natural rate of your breath. When you're in this natural state of breath with the spine moving more towards its natural curves, what do you notice about the breath? Where do you notice the body moving beneath your hands? So breathing in and out through your nose. And in your natural state, notice where you feel more of the breath move. You feel it more beneath the hand on your belly and rib cage kind of zone, or do you feel it more up in your chest or evenly in between? And simply see if you do feel any breath moving beneath the hand on your chest, can you quiet that? Taking just a few more cycles. Quieting the breath beneath your hand, feeling how the breath moves beneath the hand on your belly rib cage region. So as we move into this class focused on the core, just notice the times that your breath moves back to your chest, to your neck. When the chest moves a lot, we're recruiting the muscles, the accessory muscles of respiration, the muscles of the neck, the upper back. So I'll remind you throughout just to kind of reference this region and see if your breath or tension is being held in this region of your neck. And trying to find kind of this neutral spine, this breath of support of the diaphragm to create more of the strength from the diaphragm, from the intrinsic core muscles, rather than relying on your neck and shoulders. Slowly walk your feet in towards midline. Bring the thumbs back to touch the bottom of your rib cage and your pinkies to touch the hip points. Inhale, feel the sides of your ribs expand as you lift first one leg and then the other leg up into a supine 90-90 position. Bring the hands to touch the fronts of your thighs right below your kneecaps. And start to create a gentle pressure between your hands and the tops or the bottoms of your thighs. And check back in, noticing neutral pelvis, ribs corseting in and down, low back off the floor. Check the tension in your neck and shoulders. Continue to create this slight pressure between your left hand and left knee, keeping your knees bent and your ankles flexed. Tap your left ankle or right ankle and right foot and arm, stretching beside your ear. Inhale in this lowest face. As you exhale, bring hand and knee back to meet. So same hand, same leg move. Inhale to prepare. As you exhale, bring the opposite heel to the floor and arm to the ear. Inhale in the bottom face. As you exhale, draw them back together. Hand and knee press together. Inhale to prepare so we don't move on the inhale. Exhale, heel and arm move towards the floor. Inhale in the bottom face. And as you exhale, bring them back together. So continue to alternate sides. As you move from side to side, notice what's going on in your pelvis. So very, very little movement is happening in the pelvis. You're trying to maintain that neutral pelvis. The low back is being stabilized by the diaphragm, by the transverse abdominis, by the internal and external obliques. The tops of your rib cage continue to corset down and in. Continuing to move only on the exhale and creating just the movement, moving in the shoulder joint to stretch the arm by the ear and the hip joint to take the heel to the floor. One more time on each side, noticing what's going on in your pelvis, noticing what's going on in your ribs, noticing the tendency of the neck and shoulder muscles or the breath to travel up into the upper chest. Bring both feet down to the floor, feet wide as mat distance apart, and windshield wiper your knees side to side. Roll on to whatever side you need to roll on to look at me. So you're going to lie on your side body. So the further away you are from the floor, the easier this is going to become. So up on your elbow, shoulder above your elbow is the easiest. Taking your elbow in line with your ear and resting with the upper arm on the floor. It's a little harder. The hardest is to stretch your arm out and rest your ear on your arm. Make sure heels, hips, shoulder are all in one line. You can bring your top hand to the top of your leg, or for balance, rest your fingertips on the floor. Knit, ribs in and down, pubic bone up. Lift both of your legs off the ground. So the bottom leg is lifting up into the top foot. So lift it as high as you can go, and then hover, top leg off and touch down. So you're finding pubic bone moving up towards navel, ribs coarsening in and down. Both legs are off the floor, but the top leg is lifting off a little higher. If this is a little too much, you can obviously bring that bottom leg down. And to make it even a little bit more accessible, if that bottom leg is on the ground, you can bend the knee forward. So keeping everything all in one plane with the bottom leg lifted is a little bit more challenging. Bring both legs down and come back onto your back. Bring the block between your inner thighs. So long ways between your thighs, closer to your pubic bone than between your knees. Inhale into the sides of your rib cage, and as you exhale, lift both knees above your hips. So coming back into that supine 90-90 position. Make sure pelvis is in neutral. So pubic bone and hip points are in the same plane. Knit the bottom of your rib cage down and in. Bring the tops of your hands back to the fronts of your thighs. And again, press them towards each other. So creating that awareness of your deep core. Inhale into the sides and back of your rib cage. As you exhale, tap both heels towards the floor and reach your arms over your head. Inhale in that bottom range. As you exhale, bring them back together. So same thing, but now we're moving everything at the same time. Can you maintain that area between your pelvis, or your pelvis staying in neutral, and your ribs staying down and in? Low back is not pressing into the floor. So low back is slightly off the floor, but the bottom of the rib cage remains connected to the floor as much as you can. If you want, as you take the heels towards the ground, you can stretch the legs long and bend the knees in and up. So again, what we're looking for is to maintain this. So if you can't straighten your knees and maintain the pelvis staying in neutral and the rib cage staying towards the floor, keep the knees bent, right? We don't want to go to the next progression if we can't maintain what we're looking for, which is that stability of the deep intrinsic core muscle. So if the ribs flare or the pelvis tilts, keep the knees bent. That's how we get stronger. Going into something that our body's not ready for, just to say that we've done, the hardest thing, doesn't actually do that. It actually will create more of a tendency to go into some other pattern. Come back up, release the block between your thighs, and windshield wiper your knees side to side. So rolling on to the other side. So whatever you did on one side, do the same on this side. Making sure shoulder, hips, and ankles and knees are all in one plane. Decide where you want your top hand. Lift the top leg, lift both legs together. So push up a little bit more into the top leg with the bottom leg. So taking it into the range that you have access to, and then start to lift the top leg. So what you may find is that one side was way easier. This is one of our cross-body patterns. It's one of those patterns that takes both the work of the external and internal rotators. There's some abduction going on in the hips as well. But usually a very common pattern of instability is one of these cross-body patterns is not quite as strong as the other one. And for me, lying on my right side, my left side just can't stabilize the same way that my right side was able to. I have to work a little bit harder at it. Go ahead and come onto your belly. Stack your hands, rest your forehead on your hands, and just gently shift your hips side to side. And a rock. Bring your elbows underneath your shoulders. Spread your fingers. Press your palms down and drag your elbows towards your feet. Move the top of your chest up towards your chin and peel your lower belly off the floor by pressing your pubic bone into the floor. Lift the top of your sternum towards your chin. Move your heart forward. Keep the bottom of your rib cage knitting in and down. So finding stability in the front of the core as we move into extension of the spine. Press the top of the feet down, thighs down, pubic bone down. Lift your lower belly off the floor more. Keep that, lift your thighs. So lift the feet, lift the knees. Keep moving the pubic bone up as you lift your thighs up and back. So coming a little bit into the back of our core. Keep your legs lifted. Lower the chest down, reach the arms back, and then lift the chest. Breathe. Feel if you can bring the breath into the sides and back of the rib cage. Release. Stack your hands again, forehead on your hands, and shift your hips side to side. Hands underneath your shoulders. Press up through hands and knees. Knees come back into downward facing dog just for a moment. Come high up onto your toes. Press the tops of your thighs back. Lift and spread your sit bones. And then lower your knees. Knees wide, toes touch. Send the hips back towards your heels and rest in child's pose. And see if you can feel or imagine feeling the rib cage or the diaphragm contract as it moves downward on the inhale. Soften and release upward towards the lungs as you exhale. Good. Come up. I'm going to go through some progressions, and what we're looking for is that feeling of when we're lying on our backs, and kind of I asked you to notice how your hips were moving as you were touching one foot down and then the other. It's easier to stabilize the core when we're laying on a back. The further we get away from the floor, the harder it's going to be. So as we go through this, what we're looking for is very little movement of the hips side to side, right? So we will work through some progressions of this. The first one's on hands and knees. So block out in front of you, in front of your left hand. Tuck your toes under. First finger is parallel. Wrist, align the wrist with the front edge of your mat. And move your pelvis into neutral. So notice if your tendency is to round your back or let your back go, and find neutral. So there's still a slight curve of your low back. You might actually rest your hand in that region to see if you can feel a slight dip. And then take your block and place it on your pelvis. Knit the lower ribs down and in. So corset them in. And then simply touch your opposite shoulder. So as you go side to side, and this is step one, right? This is pretty simple. But notice the transference in your hip. So it seems like we're doing stuff for our shoulders, and to some degree we are. But notice what's happening in your hips. And maybe closing your eyes will help you see. Like when I put my weight on my right hand and shift all the way to my right hand, my right hip wants to push out to the side. So I'm trying to resist it in. So this is just a check-in. What do we notice different about one side to the other? Good. Take the block off your pelvis and set it in front of your left hand. You can also use the hand weight here. So if you prefer a hand weight, it will make it a little harder. So from this position, now lift your left leg up and back, or right leg up and back. Take your block in your left hand, take it out to the side. Take it forward and set it in front of your right hand, or a weight. Left hand down, right knee down. Lift your opposite leg back, so left leg back. Take your right hand, grab the block, take it out to the side, sweep it around, and pass it in front of your left hand. So you're just gonna go side to side with this. So when one leg lifts back, the opposite arm catches the block, takes it out to the side, and then sweeps it, places it down, hand and knee plant. And switch, leg first, block out to the side, sweep it around, and place. And that can be a hand weight. A hand weight's a little harder. So as you transition, be aware of what's going on in your hips as you kind of start to challenge the transfer of weight. And when I lift my right leg back, I really want to use, or when I lift my left leg back, I really want to use that right hip popping out to stabilize. But I'm trying to keep my hip where it's in its place in neutral and stabilize instead with my oblique muscles. Good. Release this, sit back, give the wrists a little break. So I think exploration of what our bodies do is kind of it is a practice of mindfulness, right? So we have lots of practices of mindfulness. We can kind of step away from the things that we're experiencing, kind of be in a state of flow, a state of bliss, or we can be really mindful of what our body's doing. And both of these are mindful practices. So this practice is like really checking out what's going on with your body. What does your body do to support things? Can you make one side feel like the other side? You know, the side that you feel is a little bit more cooperative. What do you need to do to make that happen? So that's kind of an interesting exploration. All right, step 3. Bring the block back to the back of your pelvis. Knees under hips, wrist under shoulders. Spread your fingers wide, first fingers parallel, or creases of the wrist in line with your front of your mat. Find neutral, so make sure your low back is not rounded or hyperextended. Knit the lower ribs in and down and hover your knees about an inch off the floor. And then back to what we did in step one. Tap, 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 opposite shoulder with your hip. And notice what's happening in your hips. Again, knees are hovering and you're tapping opposite shoulder. I lean more to one side. I try to pop my hip out. So I'm looking at my other side and going, what is that other side doing? I can stabilize on that side. Can I create that same sensation on this side? When you're done, you're done. Sit back. Child's pose is always an option. That might have gotten your heart rate up a little bit. So going back into more of that side. Come down onto whatever elbow you need to face me. And start with your wrist in line with your shoulder. And then just take it in slightly. So your forearm is maybe at a 45-degree angle in. Adjust so that your hips are in line with your shoulder and your knees are in line with your hips. Bring your top hand to your top hip. Squeeze the bottom hip to lift the hips off the floor. You're just going to go down and up. Wherever your hand is, your top hand is in your hip. When you get to that high point, then push the hip a little bit more into the hand. Next time you come up, stay up. Straighten the top leg and push the heel towards the floor, towards the bottom of your mat. Tap the top foot in front of you, lift it up, take it back, and tap it behind your mat. So tap forward, tap behind, forward, and behind. 2 more times. Notice the tendency of your pelvis to move forward or back, and try to keep it as close to neutral as you can. Stack the knees, lower down, roll onto your belly, rest your forehead on your hands, and swivel your hips side to side. So it's quite clear that we are working on some core stuff here. There's another element of thing that we're working on. As we move through the class, you might kind of notice that. So just kind of become aware of what other areas of the body we are stabilizing in addition to the spine with the core. Come back up onto your elbows and roll opposite side. Again, forearm is in about 5 degrees. Shoulders, hips, and knees are all in one line. So notice the tendency to put the knees in front of your hips and bring them back so that your knees are in line with your hips. Take your hand to your top hip and then lift the hips off the ground and down. So going down and up. When you come up as high as you think you can, then push the top hip into the hand a little bit more. See if you can get a little bit more of that side crunch and the side closest to the floor. Next time you come up, stay up. Lift the hip a little higher, straighten the top leg, and tap the leg forward and behind. And notice, are you noticing a pattern as far as one side a little easier than the other side? 2 more times, forward and back. And then lower down, roll back onto your belly. Stack your forehead on your hands and swivel side to side. Bring your hands underneath your shoulders. Press up through hands and knees. First fingers parallel or wrist in line with the top of your mat, whatever brings the wrist in top of the line of mat in one line, and then come back to downward facing dog. Lift high up onto your toes. Press the tops of the thighs back, stretch the spine. And then lower the knees. Toes touch, hips to heels, child's pose. So from a physical body-wise, as we work on coordinating all of these deep intrinsic muscles, we build more stability, we build more strength, we build more even flexibility. And as we move deeper into the core, sometimes some things come up that might be a little bit, you might have an emotional response to it. Sometimes looking deep in can also have kind of a response. So notice as some of these things, as you go through some of these things, what kind of thoughts come up in your mind? Walk your hands towards the front of your mat, spread your fingers wide. Shift forward to tabletop. I'm going to start to weave some of this stuff more into kind of traditional yoga. So move back into downward facing dog. Lift high up onto your toes. Press the tops of your thigh bones back. Lift and spread your sit bones. Bend your knees. Pull your lower belly away from your thighs. So pelvis in neutral. Knit your lower ribs down and in. So creating the awareness of the core. Straighten the legs and lower your heels towards the ground. Reach the crown of your head towards the floor. Shift your together. Shift your weight to your left foot and reach your right leg up and back. Stretch the heel up and back. Pelvis is neutral, so notice the tendency to open your right hip and keep it in. So pelvis in neutral. Pubic bone drawing up towards your navel, tailbone reaching towards your right heel. Knit your lower ribs down and in. Start to press strongly through your right hand. Come onto your left fingertips. Firm your core. Maybe start to hover. Tap the ground. So balancing on your right hand and your left foot. Bring the right foot down, drop to your knees, sit back, swivel your wrists. And if this doesn't work, you can do what we did with the tabletop and the passing of the block. So that's your regression. Moving on to the other side. Come back into downward facing dog. Find your deep intrinsic core muscles. Feet together. Shift your weight onto your right foot. Lift your left leg up and back. Notice the tendency to open the left hip and hug the right hip in. Keep the pelvis in neutral. Lower ribs down and in. Tailbone reaching towards your left heel. Pubic bone reaching towards the belly. Come up onto your right fingertips. Maybe you stay here. Maybe you test. Can you lift your right hand off the ground and just tap? Maybe you can hold. Release the hand down, release the foot down, and walk to the front of your mat. Feet up to hip distance apart or big toes touch. Inhale, halfway lift. Stretch out through the crown of your head, reach the hips towards the back of your mat. Exhale, fold. Fingertips into your hip crease, lift up halfway, hold. Find the natural curve, so low back is slightly arched, ribs drawing in and down, and lift all the way up. Good. So putting some of these things together in a sun salutation A, fun times. So starting at the front of your mat, press down through your feet, reach out through the crown. So stretch in opposite directions. Keep lower ribs down and in. Inhale, reach up, stretch up, gaze up. Exhale, move the hips back, hinge from your hips, fold forward. Knees can stay straight or bend. Inhale, halfway lift. Step back to plank pose. Reach through your heels, reach through your head. Come down onto your right elbow. Come down onto your left elbow. Come onto your right hand. Press back up to your left hand. Left elbow down. Right elbow down. Right hand down. Left hand down. So alternating sides. Again, we're looking at the pelvis. How much does the pelvis move side to side? And can you minimize that as we go through each side one last time? So left elbow down, right elbow down, right hand down, left down. Lower the knees, point the toes up towards the sky. Reach the top of your sternum towards your chin. Knit the lower ribs down, lower down to the floor. Stack the hands on top of your forehead, on top of your hands. Shake your hips side to side. And bring the hands in line with the bottom of your rib cage. Press your feet down. Pubic bone down. And up towards your navel. Lift up, cobra. Lift your belly further off the floor, maybe. Lift up dog. Knees to the floor, tuck the toes, down dog. Breathe. Stretch your spine long, reaching the crown of the head to the space between your hands, reaching your tailbone up and back. Inhale, lift up onto your toes, gaze between your thumbs. Bend your knees and step or hop to the front of your mat. Inhale, halfway lift. Exhale. Fingertips to your hip creases, elbows lift up halfway, pause. Find neutral, find your curves using your deep intrinsic core. Inhale, lift up. Round two. Press down through your feet, reach out through the crown of your head. Inhale, reach your arms over your head, gaze up. Send your hips back in space, hinge from your hips and fold. Inhale, halfway lift. Exhale, hands to the floor, step back plank. Option to regress to something we've done before. Tone the intrinsic core. Tap right hand to right shoulder, left shoulder. Left hand, right shoulder. So side to side, trying to reduce the amount of movement in your pelvis side to side. So try to keep the pelvis in the midline as you shift one hand to the opposite shoulder. Stay on your left hand, come on to side plank. So left hand is down, side plank. Right hand behind your ear. Lift. Right leg off the floor. Step it behind you. Wild thing. Lift your hips. Left shoulder down your back. Release the hips all the way to the floor. The hip down to the floor. Right knee stays bent. Reach. Right arm to rest on top of your right knee. So right knee is bent, foot is on the floor. So if you lower down from wild thing, you kind of come into this like glamour shot pose. Remember glamour shot? Left leg remains long. Inhale, press up, reach arm to ear. You're coming back into that wild thing and lower down. 3 more. Inhale, lift up, wild thing, reach right arm to right ear, hips reach up. Lower down. 2 more. Lift up. Lower down. Lift up. Stay up. Gaze down to your left hand. Come back to plank and shift to the other side. So now we're side plank on the right side. Lift the bottom hip up. Lift. Left leg up, hover. Step it behind. Wild thing. Gaze towards. Then just simply lower the hips down. So knee stays bent. Right leg stays long. Pause here. Catch your breath. And then lift. Hips, reach arm to ear, gaze towards your thumb. Lower down. Lift up. Lower down. 2 more. Lift up. Lower down. Last one. Gaze down towards your right hand. Flip back to plank. Pause. Lower down chaturanga. Point the toes back. Rest the forehead on your hands. Swivel the hips. Slow down your breath. We're getting all sides of the core, creating some heat, some energy. Prana, notice how this shows up in your body. Notice how it shows up in your mind. Forehead to the floor. Heels of the hands in line with the bottom of the rib cage, fingers pointing up towards your shoulders. Press your feet down. Press your thighs down. Pubic bone presses down and rolls up towards the navel. Navel lifts off the floor. Option for cobra. Option for up dog. Option to move through hands and knees or back to downward facing dog. Great. Come up onto your toes, gaze between your thumbs. Bend your knees, test what's going on. Can you hop using your core to the front of your mat? Exhale, fold. Fingertips to your hip crease, elbows towards the sky, lift up halfway, find neutral in your low back. Lift all the way up. Hands beside your hips. One more round. So toes touch or up to hip distance apart. Inhale, reach up, stretch up. Exhale, hinge from your hips, fold forward. Uttanasana, forward fold. Halfway lift, find extension in your spine. Come back into plank pose. Pause. Lower down onto your elbows. So elbow plank. Elbows below your shoulders. Reach the crown of the head forward. Firm the tops of your thighs. Reach your heels back. Keep your shoulders above your elbows and rock your heels to the right. So they have to be hip distance apart, and then to the left. So now we're moving the hips and the shoulders. Stay stable. Keep the hips from dropping towards the floor. Keep them shoulder height. Next time you rock to the left, stay left. Come into elbow side. Right on top of your left. Lift. Right leg off. Bend the knee. Come into elbow dog or wild thing. And then lower your hips to the ground. Right foot to the floor. Onto your back. Bend your left knee. Hands beside your hips. Press up bridge pose. Drag your heels towards your shoulders. Lower your hips down. Press through the inner edges, bridge pose. Drag heels. Lower. 3 more. Press down. Lift. Glutes, hamstrings engaged to lift higher. Lower. 1 more. Lower your hips down. Keep your right knee bent. Straighten your left leg to the ground. Lift up or bring your right hand reaching up towards the sky. As if you're reaching something out of the sky, come up onto your left elbow. So use your core to lift you up onto your left elbow. So reach with the top hand, come onto your left elbow. Take the hand towards the front of your mat. Lift your hips and come back into elbow plank. Rock both heels to the right. Come onto elbow plank on your side plank on your right side. Stack your feet. Hover your top leg, bend the knee. Elbow wild thing. Lower the hips. Roll down onto your back. Bend both knees. 5 bridges. So I said I would tell you to check in with your neck, and I haven't. So as we move towards this last kind of work towards connecting all the parts of the core, notice what's your neck doing? As you're breathing deeper, how much of your breathing is in your upper body? Hips to the floor. Keep your right knee bent. Straighten your left leg to the ground. Lift your left arm, reaching the fingers towards the sky. As if you're reaching for something out of the sky, use your core to lift up onto your right elbow. A quick kind of lift up. Look down at your right hand. Move the right hand up towards the top edge of your mat. Lift your hips. So wild thing. And then come back to elbow plank. Stay on your elbows. Walk into dolphin pose. Press down through the elbows, push them forward. Lift your hips up and back. Knit your lower ribs down and in. Drop your knees to the floor. Point your toes back in child's pose. Breathe. So notice where your mind is physically. And going through what you experienced. This journey of a class through the core, all things core. But noticing that sometimes where we think things are in our journey winds up being different. So oftentimes we think of the core more as the front of our body. But when we look at it from a different perspective, the hips, what does that change into? How does your journey through the core change? How does your perspective change? Shift forward to tabletop. Cross your ankles, sit your hips behind your heels, and come onto your back. Feet, our knees bent, feet on the floor. Press your feet into the floor, lift your hips and shift them about an inch to the left. Straighten your right leg to the ground. Bend your left knee towards your right shoulder. Grab the outside of your knee with your left hand and twist, bringing the left knee down towards the ground to the right. You can either reach your left arm behind you with the arm straight or bent, or you can just keep your hand on your side body with your elbow touching the floor. Allow your neck to rest in a comfortable position and breathe. And release your left knee, roll back to center, bend both knees, shift your hips about an inch to the right, straighten your left leg. Bend your right knee towards your left shoulder, right hand or left hand guides your right knee over to the left side of your mat. Decide a comfortable position for your right arm, for your neck. Breathe. It's just like when we take this journey into the core in a different perspective, we might find different things. When we take a journey into our core being, sometimes we find things that are different as well. My encouragement in this class was to kind of approach your body with curiosity, of interest, of introducing it to other things in your body that are working in one way that might be more beneficial. How can you take the same practice into the journey of yourself? How do your thoughts usually line up when you find those areas within yourself that are not working the way you want them to? Is there a different way? Release your twist, come back to center. Hug both knees in towards your chest and gently rock side to side. And whenever you're ready, find your way down into your final resting posture. Shavasana is one option. Also have the option to keep the knees bent with your knees knocking in towards each other, which is more of a constructive rest position. Very relaxing to the nervous system. There's also the option for Supta Baddha Konasana. We didn't do much with the hips and external rotation, so that might be an option, but just know this is a resting posture. This is the time for your body and your nervous system to quiet down, to be able to relax and release completely. So if Supta Baddha Konasana creates any kind of stress or strain, not to say that stress or strain is bad at different times, but if it creates the body tensing in any way, that might not be the best option. So just keep that in mind as you choose whatever posture, whatever final resting shape. And come back into the space of your breath. Noticing where your spine is naturally. Notice the natural state, the natural flow of your breath. Noticing where you feel the breath more. If you feel any movement of the breath in the upper chest, simply explore what it would feel like to quiet that region of your chest. Notice where your mind has wandered. And bring it back to the present. Moving with awareness, moving slowly, moving in a way that your body feels natural at the end of the practice. Start to move and making your way slowly into a seated position. Noticing the steps that your body takes to get there. The extra steps that it feels that it needs after that. Core practice, focused practice. Once arriving, settling in. Becoming aware of the gentle movement of the diaphragm down and up. And the body's response to the breath. And as you bring your hands to meet at heart center, move slowly, feeling as your hands connect. Yourself meets self. Bowing your head towards your heart, looking deep within. And just taking one kind of final thought that comes up for you as you look deep within. And thank you so much. The divine in me honors the divine in you. Namaste.